Hello. Wow, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
No, yeah, this is me literally just talking. I'm just like,
Yeah, that's
I'm
really what it's gonna be. It's just kind of us talking about everything that happened. A lot of people know about this case, but like I didn't really know as much now, like until I started to look into it. And then you actually see kind
mm,
of like, oh man, that was a lot. So covering one of California's most famous unsolved murders, and it hits really close to home because it did happen in LA, which is actually really close to both of us growing up. We both grew up out in Riverside. On the morning of
mm.
January 15th, 1947, while out on an early morning walk with her 3-year-old daughter, Betty Bersinger came across what appeared to be a dismantled mannequin in modern day, what would be Crenshaw Heights. Upon walking closer, Bersinger realized that it was actually a body. This cut-in-half mannequin was the remains of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, but better known today as the Black Dahlia. So, a little backstory on the case. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, to Cleo and Phoebe May Short, and she was the third of 5 daughters. The family relocated to Medford, Massachusetts, but after losing everything in the 1929 stock crash, Cleo was presumed dead after his car was found abandoned at the Charlestown Bridge. It's not really...
Really? Like, what a what an escape artist? Because I heard that didn't he fake his own death?
we're actually going to get to that right now. So needing to step into the role of provider, Phoebe started working as a bookkeeper and moved all the girls into an apartment staying in Medford because she didn't want to completely relocate the family. So Short eventually dropped out of high school during her sophomore year, and in December of 1942, Phoebe received a letter of apology stating that officials had made a mistake when notifying her of her husband's death. Cleo Short had actually moved to California and started a new life.
He literally just picked up and left,
Yeah,
which is what I'm not understanding.
right off the bat, things weren't necessarily stable for her.
I was like, he's already making a good name for himself. Like, he literally just assumed dead and just left.
Yeah,
When
that's
you
her.
have 5 daughters, like, you
Yeah,
don't think,
for my wife and kids are at home, but I lost my job, I lost everything. Let me just ditch
I
them.
know.
DIP.
I mean, it's a totally different time as well. Like, these are the late 40s. So, I
Yeah,
mean, who knows what was the pressures of society at that time.
true. And especially like back in those days, men were seen as the provider. Phoebe didn't work until they said that her husband was dead. She was a stay-at-home mom. Shortly after finding out her father was still alive, Elizabeth moved to California to be with her father, but the arrangement didn't last long. By January of 1943, she had moved out due to their constant arguing. I mean, I can see why they were arguing. He faked his own death,
Yeah, how she even thought to go just move with him in the first place.
right?
Like, I think he would have been dead to me. I mean, if my dad did that, I would have been like, well, obviously you didn't give one fuck about us, so.
Like, you wanted to DIP, so I'm gonna let you just keep doing that.
Yes.
So,
I mean, but hey, like, if she had her own dreams and stuff, then maybe she's taking advantage of where he's at, you know?
yeah. And I mean, she didn't really have much going on at the time because she had dropped out of high school. So, I mean, what else is she gonna do? Just sit
hmm
home and twiddle her thumbs?
Exactly, and just looking for a fresh start.
Yeah. So shortly after this, Short took a job on the naval base and moved in with several friends, but this arrangement didn't last long either, and eventually Short was arrested for underage drinking, and juvenile authorities sent her back to Medford, but she actually changed destinations and went to Florida. That says
hmm
something about her. I mean, it seems like she's not the easiest person to live with either.
Yeah, I mean, that it could be just indecisiveness. I mean, what was going on through her head? You know, I wish there was more account of that. Like,
Hmm.
just more stuff about her before the murder because like her, just if you look at her pattern, like we're going Massachusetts to California to Florida, like just very indecisive, very all over the place. These are obviously there's other circumstances or situations that we aren't ever going to know about,
Hmm.
so that's something we have to keep in mind as well.
So Short spent a brief amount of time in Florida as well. She lived with family friends that she had actually stayed with before she left high school. She had done some school there. But she was staying with family friends. She even had a brief romance, but ultimately she once again moved back to California. She worked as a waitress once she got to California and rented a small room on Hollywood Boulevard behind a nightclub. I actually couldn't find the name of the nightclub, but from what I did find, it's actually closed down. It's not still open. And regulars that she served at the
Good.
diner. Can you imagine people just going in like, oh, I heard the Black Dahlia
I
used to
mean,
work here.
us two specifically know that not all where terrible things happen, they still have them, people living in them sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's not as dark because it's just where she worked, not exactly where she was murdered.
Like where it
but
happened, yeah.
it's still.
So regulars at the diner that she served actually described her as a would-be actress. So just the way that she presented herself, it would be kind of how we see in movies today, like those girls that are, oh, I'm just a waitress until I get a job. Like, I'm actually an actress.
Mm-hmm.
But she actually never had any known roles or credits to her name.
Mm-hmm. So, I did some research on that too, which was really interesting because, like, I had always heard the story as she was a up-and-coming or just, you know, want to be actress.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some speculations that could be not even true, that she was just working. But I mean, you think about it, and like a young girl dropped out of high school or college, did you say? One of those two. And she went to the City of Dreams, you know, the very movie-esque, very star-studded place, especially LA. Like, LA has that stereotype that it's the City of Dreams and where you're going to make it, you know?
Yeah, and, like, especially, like, maybe us, like, living in California, you always hear people say, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to California to follow my dreams. I'm going to LA to follow my dreams. So it's
exactly.
Especially back in those days, that's where all these movies were being filmed. That was just everybody's go-to place. So if you were young and an actress and you weren't from there, I'm pretty sure right away you were assumed, oh, this person just up and moved here, they're probably an actor.
It's really interesting, too, because, you know, you said this happened January 15th, 1947, so we just hit the 72-year anniversary.
We did.
Just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so even that, and it's crazy, you think, like, she possibly moved to LA for pursuing acting or pursuing, you know, cinema, and, like, the difference 72 years later, like, people are moving to become vloggers, to become YouTubers, to become some type of influencer in the entertainment, and, like, that main component is still there, like 72 years later. Like, people are still viewing LA the same, despite all of the problematic things that happen and are still here in LA.
And, like, especially really when people talk about how hard it is to make it, it's still like, oh, if you're gonna make it, LA's the place to go.
Doesn't sound true to me, because I feel like you can be anywhere as long as you're, you know, interesting or if you're passionate.
And, like, I mean, now we're in 2019, the way social media works, people become famous off of one video and it blows up.
Very overnight, which is really sad when you think about how that's how, like if I had always read that if she was wanting to be an actress and she wanted to, you know, find fame, that she ultimately found it in her death, which is just like,
yes, and that's
because this is the most. For California, at least. For LA, that's the most famous murder, and everyone knows about it.
Yeah, it definitely. In California, it's one of the most infamous unsolved crimes. Probably there's only like about a handful, but when you think of especially Southern California, I feel like this is kind of where your head goes.
Exactly, yeah.
But at the time, as she was a waitress, Short was casually dating a 25-year-old married salesman who was actually also a former army man for about a month leading up to her murder. So what she actually did, and I mean, it's pretty common now. What they said back in the day, what she did was she was dating for dinner, which, you know, girls and guys would go out on dates casually just for dinner, but nothing actually ever came of it. So, I mean, I guess, like, nowadays that's common because it's just dating. Like, people will meet other people, like we said, on social media, and then they'll go out on a couple dates and then leave it at that.
Like, a struggling actress, you know, like I mean, I feel like that's not as surprising, and it's not as I don't judge her for that. I get that, you know, especially, I mean, her father's a psycho, like, I mean, she's really just trying to make it on her own, so I mean, there's no harm in just going out to dinner, and if it doesn't work out, it's fine. Hey, you got a free meal.
Yep.
I think that's fine.
I'm a struggling actress and I want to eat tonight. You know what? I'm gonna go on a date.
Take me to Costco. Take me
to
wherever you want to take me.
So in the days leading up to the crime, on January 9th, 1942, Short was returning home from a brief trip to San Diego with her boyfriend at the time. His name was Robert Red Manley. So Manley drove the both of them to LA and dropped Short off at the Bitmore Hotel at around 6:30 p.m. And this is actually the last place that she was reported being seen alive, was at 6:30 at the Bitmore Hotel. So now we're getting into the crime. So on January 15th, 1947, the remains of Elizabeth Short were found in a vacant lot by Bersinger, who we mentioned earlier was taking a walk with her daughter. Her body was found cut in half, shockingly pale, adding reason to why the body was mistaken for a mannequin at first. Investigators noticed that there was no blood on the scene, meaning that the body had been moved. Her face was cut nearly ear to ear, leaving her with a forever haunting smile that she's known for today. The coroner later revealed that the face was cut while she was still alive. Oh, that's crazy.
That's disgusting, dude.
The fact that, like,
because it's not even...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, it's not even... Like, it didn't seem random at this point. Like, I had read that it was very much... It seemed very much a crime of passion. Like, it was almost personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to the point where, like, the level of torture and the level of evil that, like, went into her murder was just, like, very next level, that it almost seemed... Like, it couldn't have been random.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it totally could have. We don't know, but... Like, it just seemed very personal. Like, that was a very, very violent way to kill someone.
And especially, like, if you're... How they said that the face was cut while she was still alive. I mean, you're in somebody's face while you're cutting it. You're hearing her screams. Like, you know, you're right there in her face doing it. And
to be mistaken as a mannequin, like, can kind of just tell you how, you know, not human-like she looked anymore. Like, how quickly she was reduced to, like, an inanimate object. Like, she was so, like, she was once someone, and here she is now, like, being mistaken for a mannequin. Like, it just complete night and day, too. Like,
no, it definitely,
and you think of, like,
it definitely was, like, very dehumanizing to be found like that.
Exactly. And have you seen the crime scene photos?
I have. I like, looked at them kind of investigating this just to take notes on how her body essentially was found and then how she was posed. And
yeah, I was surprised at how much evidence there was in the sense of, like, how many crime scene photos are available to the general public now. And, like, because, you know, true crime is, like you said, like, people often, like, if you're really into murder or true crime, people kind of think you're crazy. So, like, it's probably not something you just go out and talk about. But, like for me, seeing what police saw, like, when they got there, so when I saw the Black Dahlias, it was insane and awful, because, like, the thought of, like, what she went through in her last moments, like, or even, like, not however long that took, it's kind of insane.
No, and where my mind went when I was looking at those, I mean, they said that there was no blood on the scene. I mean, can you imagine, like, how much more gruesome it would have been if there was blood on the scene? If her body wasn't completely drained and it finished hemorrhaging
that's true.
there?
Because they said that, like, that she had been completely drained and that, like, her body was scrubbed clean.
Yeah, her body was scrubbed
clean. So, like,
clean.
all evidence. I mean, I don't think they had NT-47. They didn't have DNA evidence to track, or, like, for fingerprints or anything like that. But, like, she was scrubbed clean. And, I mean, they also brought in the idea that it was just so cleanly done, which I know inspired some possible leads and suspects later on.
Yes. So, autopsy reports showed that there was no trauma to the bones or organs. What this means was that when she was cut in half, it was done with surgical, like, precision. So, if you think about, like, just kind of paint the picture. So, her body was cut so clean that it was almost surgical, like when you go in for surgery.
Yeah. I was researching it the other night, and it was crazy because there's a specific name for what was done with her, like a specific procedure that I will not remember right now because it's very medical, like a medical term. But basically, where she was cut was there's only one spot in the entire body where, like, you can be cut cleanly in half, and that's exactly where she was. So that's why people think that.
No, yeah, there is a medical term for actually having the body cut in half. And then again, like, if your mind works the way that ours do, you kind of think, how many bodies had to be cut in half for them to actually create a medical term for it?
I'm just confused because, like, any normal, you know, person who doesn't have a desire to kill, like, the thought of just killing someone or taking their life, insanely terrifying.
Within the autopsy, it was showed that Short died of a hemorrhage and shock. So it means that essentially she did bleed out, and it was the shock that killed her. But there were also marks on her legs, wrists, neck, and thighs, showing that she had been bound and tortured. But ultimately, trauma to the head also did suggest that she did receive a concussion. So kind of like what this shows me is that, you know, I'm assuming that she was, like, hit over the head with something to knock her out. And then maybe, like, she woke up and that was when she had been, like, tied up, and then that's when her torture started.
Which is awful.
So 9 days after Short's body was found, the LA Examiner had received a package with some of Short's belongings and even a letter sent in the form of a ransom note that was filled out with a bunch of magazine and newspaper clippings, and it was signed the Black Dahlia Avenger. So What they received was a box with her ID, her phone book, some of her belongings that she would have had on her at the time. Police contacted up to 75 men in Short's address book, and a majority of them had only gone on 2 dates with Short. And again, this is what we referred to earlier, that she was one of those women that was dating for dinner, which was very common back in her day. But still, up to 75 men.
I know. I was like, Jesus.
Like, okay, girl.
To eat dinner.
Do your thing. Among the men contacted, one of which was Manley, who we mentioned earlier was her boyfriend at the time, and he was one of 2 main suspects. I'm going to talk about him first, just because ultimately he was named not the killer. Spoiler alert. So Manley willingly took a polygraph exam after pleading his innocence to officials, and detectives even went so far as to administer Manley with sodium pentothal, which at the time was believed to be a form of truth serum.
Okay, I mean,
maybe that's why we have so many
maybe
that's why we have so many unsolved cases back in the 40s and 50s. Let's just give everybody that truth serum.
Where's Wonder Woman's lasso when you need it?
And I wonder, because didn't they even do that? Like, I don't know if you've seen that movie Divergent. They give them truth serum, and it literally puts them in pain to lie.
Isn't that's also what Wonder Woman's thing does? Like, if you try and resist it, it like hurts you, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what we need, honestly.
I don't know. Maybe it didn't work. That's why they stopped doing it.
I have a quick question. Like, what do you think? So when the police received the package with all her belongings and the ransom, or the note, like, do you think that some of these people like almost want to be caught, like, or they want some sense of like ownership over what they did, like they almost want people to know
the person who did it?
Yeah,
I really feel like, I mean, because it's the same thing that happened. Like, it happens all the time with like serial killers. They instinctively like leave a clue behind because, I mean, there's some part of them that essentially wants to be caught. They want people to know, like, this is my crime. This was my murder.
Because, like, I was watching a couple interviews with Jeffrey Dahmer, and he was just saying, like, it's a sense of power, a sense of dominance. Like exactly, like, you did that. Like, I did this. I'm in control. And, like, because I feel like if you're mailing, like, a letter to the FBI saying, like, I did this, and, like, that's just very ballsy to me, But, I mean, again, 1947, they're not going to trace your saliva, DNA, blah, blah, blah. So I guess they do have more room there, but...
No, yeah, just because, I mean, I'm not saying that it was known to the public, but, I mean, at the time, like, if a murder had been committed... So, say, like, something happened prior to this, and then people... Like, the detectives still hadn't figured out who done it. It's like, okay, maybe they got away with it, so my turn. Whether it's
definitely
like nowadays,
inspiring to other crazies.
Yeah, and then like nowadays we have so much technology that like we can do same day like saliva samples. We can do same day DNA testing. Granted, it does take longer, just to kind of like prolong things, but I mean it's possible.
I mean, yeah, and you think now like there's cameras on every street corner, on every, in surveillance cameras in every business, or usually there are. So I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this kind of stuff couldn't happen today, but it just definitely would be a lot harder to pull off or to get away with, at least.
No, that's definitely it. Like, it is harder to get away with it nowadays. Because, I mean, granted, it still happens. Like, society isn't perfect, like, compared to how it was back in the day. Like, things haven't changed much. But, no, yeah, definitely. Like, I remember my sister was telling me that some guy got caught. He had, I guess, murdered a girl, but her murderer was found on Snapchat. Because she had taken a photo beforehand.
Really?
And that's how they found out who it was that killed her.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, so I mean,
and like there was another person too, like something along the lines of like they couldn't find out who it was, and then like someone in that killer's family took a 23andMe test.
Oh, and
DNA
like, matched?
They matched the DNA, yeah, and they ended up catching him, but it was like 20 years later, like it was unsolved or something. So I'm just like, geez, like even just now technology is getting to a place where it's like we're not even intentionally doing this, like just because there's so much out there that it's just getting easier. So like I definitely think like before the 80s, or like maybe at least before the 90s and farther back is definitely the era of serial killers, like where they could pull it off more easily. And I think that's why we don't really see many anymore. Like, I mean, not
Like, at
in the
least
sense of
nothing
like,
like at this
yeah, nothing
scale.
like this. Yeah, I mean, everyone's just going out and shooting everyone, which is tragic and sad in its own problem.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there was something interesting about the way the serial killers used to be, in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that like I mean, everyone's talking about Ted Bundy right now, right? Like the Netflix thing just hit.
Yeah.
He literally murders. I mean, almost 40 young girls, like, and not that far apart either. And to think like, do you think someone could do that now? Like
Kind of
in
just
the way
go
that
on
he did
like
that, I don't think.
in like a
Yeah,
Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer like type of serial
yeah,
killing.
like where it's kind of just it's very high scale, very a
Mm-hmm.
lot of victims, but like virtually unknown. Especially like in Dahmer's case, like they didn't know for 10 years,
Yeah.
like a whole decade went by, you know. And like this,
Well, I
like,
mean, you could say Ted Bundy too. Like they said he was a very charismatic guy that like he walked in a room, you wouldn't know he'd done it.
I know it was so infuriating watching watching that stuff, like just seeing like how because I feel like every person in that case kept saying like he just doesn't look like the person, and I'm just like
Well,
yes,
what
like
does the person
that
look
is his
like?
thing, that is his method, like that he's the most least
That's
suspecting.
and that's exactly the reason there were so many women
Yeah,
murdered.
it's so weird, like because like I mean, what defines a killer? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just it's almost dangerous to say that there is a stereotype because then you're leaving out so many other potential people
Right.
because you don't have to look a certain way to be a killer. Like we can all be killers. We're just most of us choose not to, you know, or most of us don't even have that thought in our minds.
It's like, see, when I wake up in the morning, I don't think I want to kill somebody.
I know it's very weird how different things are now compared to then. But I mean, what is our modern day serial killer now? Maybe there are mass
True.
shooters because that's happening
Because
multiple
that
times
is
a
the
week.
most common thing happening.
Yeah, and those are people who are getting multiple fatalities, who are looking for mass casualties, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that could be our modern day serial killer, but the whole thing about serial killers before was that there was like an aloofness, you know, like there was something about not being caught or something about being that person, like you said, like even the Black Dahlia, like that's what I was trying to mention earlier. Like, do you think the killer who got away with this, like, felt some type of satisfaction knowing that, like, he pulled off one of the most famous LA murders, or the most famous?
I mean, definitely, yeah. Like it's something that gets looked back on, and just like, I mean, you can imagine like somebody growing up, and then they're like on their deathbed. You're like, you know what? But I got away with it.
Mm-hmm. And you always hear those cases of serial killers or just people confessing, like, on their deathbeds,
Yeah, they're like, I
which
mean,
is
I'm
such an
dying. What are
asshole
they gonna
move.
do?
Like, I
That's
was
such a
just
dick
like,
move.
it really is. Like, because first off, is there any way to prove it, especially in a case this old? But it's just wild, honestly.
Really is. Okay. So I love how this all started
I
because
love
we were
this off
talking
on
about
tangent.
truth serum,
It
but
means so much. I know.
but no, yeah. So Manley was actually the only one that received that injection of truth serum. Ultimately, he all charges against him were dropped. They figured it wasn't him.
Mm.
I didn't write down the exact date or the amount of years, but what I did think was very tragic. He died, I want to say, exactly 9 years after Short had died.
Like, to the date, or do
To
you
the
just mean like 9 years later?
No, to the date of her death, like a certain amount of years exactly, he died of, I believe it
Oh,
was
really?
in his Anaheim apartment.
Whoa. Do you
Yeah.
think are there theories that that's somehow connected? Like maybe like a guilt trip, or?
Some people did want to say guilt trip. Other people discredited that because they said like, it was somebody that not necessarily like he like was in love with her, but he did have a love for her because they were friends for such a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I
they
mean
did
that's
have,
such a long
so it's
spread,
like,
you know, to even assume.
so I can see that. And then people did say like, it was like very tragic, but I mean, like to really like, think about it, like
I just don't
exactly to the
see.
date.
Yeah, but then I think like whoever did do this murder or whoever committed this murder, like they went to like very dark lengths
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish this. And like, do you think they would crumble out of guilt? I felt like they almost took too much pride in their work, if you would want to call it that, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah,
Like they
definitely.
don't be proud of it, but I mean also we're guessing at this point, you know?
Yeah. No, so I don't believe that Manley was the one that had done it.
Yeah, I don't either.
Just because I mean, by all accounts, like he was somebody that was essentially like one of her only like actual friends out in LA.
Mm.
But yeah, that was a little little fun fact, I guess, that he did die like exactly, I'm not exactly sure, but to the date of her death exactly. So he ends up sharing an anniversary with her.
That is so weird.
So the second suspect, and it's actually the most believable one, was when Dr. George Hodel. So I'm going to refer to him as George, just because another Hodel does come in later on. So a little bit about George Hodel. He was a wealthy LA-based doctor, and he was well-connected, and it was noted that he did have an extremely high IQ. When he was in medical school, he had studied to be a surgeon, and it was said that he kind of breezed through medical school like it was nothing to him, but he never actually practiced as a surgeon. He ended up being a doctor in charge of venereal disease clinic.
Okay.
Yeah. And at the time, that was really big because he was known to treat primarily LA's elite, like all of their actors, everybody high up in LA, as well as the sex workers. So, I mean, I guess there has to be a doctor for everything. Because, I mean, to actually go into that field of study, like, you'd want to think, like, that's somebody that genuinely wants to help people. But, I mean, as we're going to get into it right now, like, he ends up being the most believed suspect for the death.
Yeah.
So
I know. And the story is wild, too. Like, how this theory came up is pretty crazy.
Yeah. So later on, after retiring as an LAPD homicide detective, Stephen Hodel published his research stating that he believed that the killer of the Black Dahlia was George Hodel. So Steve Hodel is actually George Hodel's oldest son.
The irony.
Yep. So
the betrayal, if it wasn't.
The betrayal.
Can you imagine if, like, your son was just like, yeah, he did it, and you did do it, like...
Well, he does have reason. He does have reason. Which we're going to get into it. So George Hodel is Steve Hodel's son, which, like I said, is important. It's going to play a big deal into it later on. And what's interesting was he was actually never assigned to the Black Dahlia case just because it had happened way after he had actually become a detective. The reason he gained such interest in it was because he had found a couple of photos that he believed to be Elizabeth Short in his father's belongings, but it was never actually confirmed that those photos were Elizabeth Short.
And this happened too, like, he found the photos after his dad had already passed away, correct?
I believe so.
I want to say that's true. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like he could ask him or, like, I mean, that he would even tell the truth. But yeah. I've searched for the pictures because apparently you can find the picture online.
Yeah. So
of, it's like, the one that he saw. It's
like a very blurry photo, but I understand, like, how people can say, like, oh, yeah, that's her. But then also, just because it isn't a portrait, like, you can't, like, exactly see her face. So it's like, okay, yeah, you can't 100% confirm, but you can about, like, 90% confirm that is her.
I have to look, like, trying to pull it up now. Interesting.
Because you'll see that one, and then, like, if you see a photo of her, like, just sitting down, like I said, you can kind of tell, like, okay, that's her, but I can see, like, why it's not 100%.
It's like, so borderline her and borderline, like, any other brunette. Like, yeah. It's such a fine line, and... a couple, like, I feel like one of these definitely kind of looks like her, but then the other one, it's a lot harder to tell.
Yeah, just because they're so blurry. The quality, they didn't have that iPhone 10 pixel camera.
Their biggest mistake, honestly.
Yeah.
Just use HD.
For
4K,
real.
come on.
Steve Jobs was born in the wrong time period.
I know.
So yeah, it was essentially him finding this photo, just these two photos with all of his dad's stuff, that it was like light bulb, and it kind of set him off on this hobby. Okay, so the reasons that he is the best suspect: one, he would have had the surgical training necessary to manipulate Short's body with the exact precision. Like I said, in medical school he trained to be a surgeon, but he never actually practiced it. So, it kind of makes you think, like, okay, he did it in medical school, so why wouldn't he?
I feel like for me that's one of the biggest.
Yeah, that is definitely one of, like, the bigger
that's
things.
Probably the biggest lead. Yeah, because I mean, like I said, like, to have, or like we both said, like, the cut was just insanely clean, and, like, for there to only be one spot in the entire body where you could do that clean, and for him to know that,
right,
like, there has to be some type of training or background, right?
Yeah. No, and I mean, like we
They
said
can't be
earlier,
so obvious.
it was so clean to the point where there was no trauma to the organs or the bones. So I mean, to cut through
Hmm.
bones, like if you think about it, nowadays in emergency rooms, they'll use bone saws.
I just, it's just insane to think about. And I always think about what she was thinking, like in that moment, or like, you know, waking up, if she did, like if she was hit over the head and she woke up like on some table, like to be tortured. Oh, I hope not.
Oh,
Well, we had read that, like the cut on her face is where she bled out from, like that she was bleeding so much from that
oh, that
ultimately led it.
that's what killed her.
That's what people think, but I mean, I could be wrong.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it because, like I said, the autopsy did show that she died from shock. So it could have been like all the blood that she had lost just from her face. Like it was the fright that killed her.
Because that was a deep cut. If you see
Oh no,
the up
yeah.
close pictures, like the autopsy compared to her normal picture, is devastating.
It's like if you pinch like your mouth like outside and inside, he cut through that entire skin to like make her mouth
People,
bigger.
exactly. Like, I mean, for people who maybe like don't want to look at it or like,
Yeah.
you know, go look up those pictures, like it's very much Heath Ledger's Joker, like the
Yeah.
red, like from ear to
Well,
ear, like a big smile.
it's that big, but it's not like if you've seen like the movie of Heath Ledger in it, it's like if that skin like you just have a bigger mouth because
Hmm. Like it's
it
completely
wasn't a
cut. Yeah.
superficial cut. It was like no, completely cutting that skin in half.
Hmm.
Like
Exactly.
like if you had like a big enough mouth like jaw to jaw, like ear to ear,
Hmm.
that was all cut.
Which is so dark and so. I mean, obviously, this whole thing is unnecessary, but like that was such an odd thing to do, in my opinion.
Right. And there was never any I couldn't find any reasoning to why. Like why they cut her face, why they left her with that grisly smile like.
Yeah, and then like you said, like they posed her in a specific way, like so you
Yeah.
like her arms were over her head and her legs were spread out, and her
Yeah.
body was like her upper half was like 3 or 4 feet away from her bottom half. Like they very much wanted you to see that
Hmm.
she was cut in half and mutilated. It was just disgusting, dude.
So another reason that George was actually the best suspect for the murder was he was linked to another woman's murder exactly 3 weeks later, one Janine French, who died on February 10th, 1947. So we're actually approaching her anniversary of passing too.
Hmm. So was he charged with this, or was because I hadn't heard about this
About
case.
French? No.
Yeah.
The reason like it was linked to it was because her head, she received the similar blunt force trauma to the head. Her body was posed almost exactly the same. Her arms above her head, her legs spread open. Her body wasn't cut in half, from what I can found. It was just laid out. But the initials BD were on the body. So if you remember earlier, once the LA Examiner received that package, it was signed the Black Dahlia Avenger. This one was just signed BD for Black Dahlia.
Interesting. I did
And
not know about that.
yeah. So the note that was sent to the police earlier, it was claimed that it had the same handwriting as was found on French's body.
I want to know who, like, how do you know? Because, like, isn't it you're kind of just going off of what you see, right? Because, like, I always hear that joke, like, how do you even become a professional, like, handwriting expert? Like,
Yeah.
to be able to tell. 'Cause, I mean, like, unless someone writes, like, very uniquely or in a very specific way, like, how could that be used as evidence, you know?
When I'm at work, I can see somebody's writing and be like, oh yeah, that's my boss's writing, or oh no, that's my coworker's writing. There's not that many of us. If you think about it, like, you're kind of comparing all of LA.
But then again, like, it's 1940s.
True.
Like, what do they have to go off of, you know? Like, as just,
True.
they're really looking for leads anywhere they can. I
But
mean,
then it also,
there's no harm in looking into
Yeah.
something.
but then it also makes you wonder, like, I mean, nowadays we have technology to kind of actually evaluate the way people write. Back in the day, they were honestly just doing it by eye.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true because that's such a hard thing to prove, and like to especially back then, like if you're just saying like, oh, look at it, because like at that point you're probably trying to see the similarities more than you're trying to see the differences, because you're trying to lock someone up, you're trying to charge someone.
Yeah, and I mean, like, now we know that, like, you can kind of trick your own mind into seeing what's actually not really there.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea of witness, like having a witness or like using that as evidence or like stuff like this, like it's kind of up to interpretation almost. because like you said, like the mind can play tricks on you. It can make you think or see what you want to see. So, but it's just like this murder happened in an awful time period.
Definitely.
In terms of wanting to solve it.
In terms of like giving her justice, making sure that her killer was caught.
Which is horrible and just really sad when you think about it.
So a forensic expert hired by Stephen Hodel claims that the written initials on French's body did match that of George Hodel's handwriting. So Stephen went out of his way to hire his own forensic expert. Yeah.
Like, wow. Like, that's like, I mean, the determination is there. Like, he really believes his father did this.
It was definitely like a chain reaction. Like, once it was kind of in his mind, I'm pretty sure it was like him opening his eyes and like everything made sense to him. On January 9th, 1947, George Hodel had 50-pound sacks of concrete sent to his home the last day Short was seen alive, only a few days before her body was found. Similar sacks of those 50-pound cement bags were found next to Short's body at the crime scene. And then in 1950, George Hodel moved to the Philippines, which wasn't necessarily a good idea, but it does kind of tie into the fact again why we believe that he is the suspect. In 1967, 17 years after his initial move to the Philippines, a similar body was found, posed similarly in a vacant lot. All the cuts were the same. Yep. And all of this happened in a vacant lot less than a mile away from where George was living at the time.
Okay, see, that's a whole different story right there. Like, that's because I mean, essentially they're following him, these murders.
What's crazy is that, the Black Dahlia has so much, I guess, fame to it. Whether it was when French died, that's not something that we hear about. This girl in the Philippines, that's not something that we hear about. Like, I didn't know about these until I actually started, diving deep into this crime. But for it to, be so similar, it's,
I hadn't
crazy.
Even heard about the last murders. No, yeah, that's why I was like, that's a very specific, especially the posing and just, the cutting in half. But that's very specific.
I don't know how many it is, but I know the FBI has once so many crimes happens, it's officially a serial killer.
Mm-hmm. But then you think, I mean, the difference, like if he weren't living a mile away from where that second body was found, or the third body, I guess you would say, in the Philippines, if he wasn't there, I was like, okay, well, maybe someone's just, inspired, a copycat.
Copycat murder.
But the fact that he was there and, a mile away is very concerning.
If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is.
Yeah, because at that point, you should be actively searching him as prime suspect.
So right now we're going to jump forward before we go back.
Okay.
So in 2012, an LA reporter, his name was Steven Lopez, was actually granted access to the case files. And in these case files, he did find Dell listed as the main suspect. Again, I definitely believe it. Mm-hmm. There were records stating that the LAPD had placed over 24 recording devices throughout Hodel's LA home.
They're probably just, desperate at this point. Because I had heard that, the Black Dahlia case, was front page news for, 2 months after it happened.
Definitely.
So, it was very, very top story.
Mm-hmm. So these recordings had up to 40 days leading up to Hodel's relocation to the Philippines. So right before he left, they were recording him.
Okay.
So it kind of ties into the whole, maybe he found it. He found one of the devices and then he's like, okay, I'm done. I'm moving. All the recordings ended up being destroyed, but there were transcripts of these recordings that were filed. And in one of them, they even found that Hodel said, quote, "Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anyways, because she's dead."
See, okay, when he's talking about his secretary, is he talking about
French? No.
Oh, okay.
I thought
that's
that
what
too.
I want to know.
No, I thought that too. Essentially, when I found it, it made me go back and look over things again, just saying, wait. But even just with that, he's saying, "Oh, suppose I did kill her." They couldn't prove it. So I'm like, when you say something like that, it kind of makes me think you did.
Who is he referring to? Because it couldn't have been Short because she was a waitress at a bar, wasn't she?
From what I found, his secretary was just somebody that did work for him at the clinic, and she died from old age.
Oh, interesting. Why would she be the key to?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is probably the least alarming part of his quote. Definitely the first half is where we should be looking, like you said.
Yeah.
Where he's talking about if he did it. That's essential. That's like O.J. Simpson, where he wrote that book, If I Did It. Like, I was just like, all right. Like, I mean,
Like, you did it.
yeah, I know. I was like, you'd think that you'd want to like not say stuff like that, but
Hmm.
because it's definitely not happening in his case. But obviously, he didn't know that he was being recorded.
But then what I also started thinking is, I mean, why would his secretary know? Like, could she have been in
Yeah,
on it? Like, could she have found something that incriminated him to it, and maybe he threatened her to keep quiet about it? Like, did he pay her off? Like, it kind of opened up a whole other door of questions for me.
yeah. And some more research I had done said that he would do underground abortions for women. I mean, in if I'm just going off of like where my mind's going right now,
Hmm.
I'm thinking maybe his abortion business.
Hmm.
Maybe she was the one getting or like finding out like, oh, this girl wants an abortion, because I mean that's underground. That's like very
Yeah,
against the law.
at the time, it definitely was against the law. That's why like it was such a dangerous procedure, and it was something that was definitely frowned upon. So either his secretary knew and was kind of preparing the girls to go in, or maybe she was covering it up in a way.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think maybe like I'm picturing her as like receptionist. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you want an abortion? Like this is where you can. Because I mean, like I'm thinking it's underground business. Like maybe in like his basement or something, just like where you need to be away from the public. Nobody's gonna know about it. Like kind of like the perfect place.
Mhm.
And then linking that to like maybe that's where he took Elizabeth. Like this is a place where like I'm sure like you
I
can't
have kind
have
of
anyone know about this specific spot because like you said, like it's so illegal to do abortions at this time. Like
yeah, because this is
everything was.
way back before Roe v. Wade.
Mhm.
Um,
That's why I'm just like it's the pieces kind of all seem to fit together until they don't, until like you kind of get further into the story and like you hear about the things why maybe he's not a suspect.
mhm.
It's just interesting. I don't know where the secretary ties in, but
But I feel like she
he's
did
definitely
play a role
made
into it.
himself very guilty.
I feel like if she didn't incriminate herself, he definitely did saying that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, these are just theories that we're going with. Like
Yeah,
maybe
no,
she was
definitely.
involved, she wasn't.
Everything that we're kind of saying is a theory. I mean, this is
We're
just
just like,
our own
us talking.
interpretation of it.
Yeah, definitely.
We're gonna sit down today and solve this crime.
Even if we solved it, I mean, we're just not even gonna say that. Like, there's no way.
24 years old and we solved an 80-year-old crime.
I know.
So another one of these recording transcripts actually described what would have sounded like a woman being attacked in Hodell's basement. So, how you mentioned earlier, all of this stuff was taking place downstairs of his house. Maybe could have been it.
Because I mean, like, I'm not in any way, form, a doctor in any way,
Mm-hmm.
but, and of course, like, I'm not exactly sure how he would perform these abortions, but did he have some type of like anesthesia or like some type of numbing? Like, if they didn't, like, wouldn't it have to be a place where like someone could freely be in pain and still not be found out? Like, I don't know if a woman getting an abortion back in the day was painful, but like if she was screaming, you would obviously not want him or want anyone to hear it, right?
Somewhere, like, where she could be heard.
Like a little bit more soundproof. So like,
Yeah.
like that's something like, wouldn't it be the perfect place if he were to want to commit a murder? Like that would be the perfect spot because he already knows it's like soundproof or at least enough to where nobody could hear.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So what's even crazier? In 1950, an investigation connecting Hodell to Short's crime was abruptly shut down, according to a CBS special. So out of nowhere, they kind of just, all connections that he had to the crime, he was no longer a suspect.
Really?
Yeah. It was, like I said, it was very abrupt. The lead investigator claimed that recordings from Hodell's home eliminated him as a suspect. But since those recordings were destroyed and all that we had was transcripts from select recordings, it's not something that we can actually go back and like listen to or read about.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I call bullshit. I think because like you think like especially LA, like obviously like no offense to them now, like we're talking about back in the day, like cover-ups were a big thing.
How
I would
people
say
say
it's
like
a lot more
the
dominant.
LAPD was definitely very corrupt, very dirty at the time. That actually like does play into it as well.
Oh really?
Yeah, so Steve Hodell, George Hodell's son, claims that since his father had so many connections, he had knowledge of corruption within the LAPD. He would have known hearing the gossip from everybody, it's believed that he actually went in, spoke to lead investigators, and told them, I can expose you for all the dirty cops that you have, all the abortion rings that you have, everything that you guys are covering up. I can expose you if you expose me.
That's almost scary because that's so, I feel like to this day that could happen. I mean, especially back then, like you said, like, especially, I think the thing that catches my attention is you said, like, oh, he's a doctor to the elites.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people just make that a very big deal. And, like, that is completely plausible. Like, I can see him kind of blackmailing them.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember Stephen Lopez, that reporter from Modern Day, when he was looking into the Black Dahlia files, it was revealed that the LAPD.
Yeah, I couldn't.
I know. So the LAPD even revealed that most of the Black Dahlia evidence was missing and or destroyed, and there was no clear reason as to why.
That's just, I don't...
Like, what was the reason for that?
That's so annoying. Yeah, that's so, like, for lack of a better words, that's just so infuriating because, like, these are people's lives, like...
I feel like if your murder was never solved, there's no reason that all evidence with your murder should ever be thrown away.
Yeah, like, and that just keeps me thinking there's foul play. Like, there's something within the police something's not right for sure.
Definitely. So that's actually all of my research. Any final thoughts?
Yes. So I was reading up on Stephen Hodel, or that's him, right? The son?
Stephen Hodel's the son.
So when he was, very active in proving that his father was the killer, and I think he wrote a book about it.
He did.
He hired an investigator.
Yeah, he published all his findings, but in that publishing, he also kind of gave insight into their life beforehand. And, George Hodel just overall wasn't a good man. I remember reading that he had a daughter that he spoke to her inappropriately, and she ended up running away, and that he was always, like, picking on Steven. So he wasn't necessarily a good father, let alone a good man.
I was confused because I'm pretty sure, I'm going to try and double check on this, but Steven, the oldest son, also, like, I think later on said, like, that George, his father, was responsible for the Black Dahlia, but that he was also the Zodiac killer.
What?
And that's where I was like, everything you've ever said just completely flew out the other way for me because...
Spoiler alert, we solved 2 crimes in one.
Because I was just like, what do you mean? Like, I don't even know how... This is so fluid. The Zodiac killer was active from the late 60s to the early 70s. So, I mean, he definitely wouldn't have been...
I mean, yeah, he would have been alive.
Or, like, possible suspects. Like, they always seem to be, like, from mid-30s to, like, early 40s, or even possibly younger too. Like, I wouldn't George have been an older man? Because he was already kind of old during the Black Dahlia time, wasn't he? Like, I mean, he wasn't super young.
No, he wasn't. I think when the Black Dahlia stuff happened, I really want to say he was in his 30s or 40s.
But I feel like by Steven trying to say that his dad was responsible for both, like that
kind of discredited him.
It was such a blow to his theory, yeah, because like those are 2 of California's like most popular unsolved murders. And,
I mean, like, it really is like when you think of,
and that's NorCal and SoCal too.
Yeah, so just when you think of like crimes that happen in California, right away, like that's where my head goes to. Not just because like it's something we're covering, but because
I mean, there's more obscure ones that are unsolved, but like if you're talking about like most well known, Zodiac and Black Dahlia are very very well known,
especially ones that are never caught.
Like I would argue those are definitely the most well known. I mean, there's obviously more.
Dude, California, I swear.
I know. And, like, just to wrap up, Black Dahlia, awful, very vicious, very evil. Like, if you look at, like, a lot of it seemed like the torture was just unnecessary. Just cutting her in half. They were dismembering her. Like, they were altering her face. Like, it was just so evil to me.
Like, it was done so maliciously.
It was very personal, it seemed. And, like, it's very tragic because that was someone in the prime of their life. Like, whether or not she was there for acting or not, or just, pursuing a life of her own. And to be cut short in that way is tragic.
And like you mentioned earlier, it's always said that she didn't actually achieve the fame that she wanted until after her death.
Yeah, I mean, she's going down in history forever. Like, like the thought that these are going to be unsolved forever, like, bothers me. Because, like, I really just don't think that people who can do stuff like this should be,
Should be able
escaping
to get
justice.
away with it.
So unforgiving, so very hard to understand, and I can't, do you think he's still alive?
I don't think he's still alive now.
No, because he'd be well into his hundreds by now. It's 72 years later.
Yeah.
So he's definitely dead. Also, before we go, I did read that there were some theories that this could have been done by a woman.
Oh.
Which is interesting because literally nobody would think about that. Well, even now, I feel like women serial killers are just like women killers are still not, especially think about it, 1947, women are very seen as very innocent. And I remember, I wouldn't be able to say the whole theory complete, but I just know like they were like, okay, well, what if it was a woman? Like that's almost just being a woman and having done this, like that's just the ultimate free pass because nobody's going to suspect you.
But I mean, if you think about it, remember, she was dating a married man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't completely discredit that theory.
There's so many possible pathways to solve this, And that's, obviously, that's probably why it's still unsolved.
That's why a case does go cold, either because there's not enough evidence or because there's too much evidence. And in this case, there wasn't enough evidence, but it seemed like there were too many suspects.
Yeah, there's too many possible, things that could have gone down. And I think that's the most unnerving of this. Like, we're never going to know exactly what happened to her. And, like you said, like, she was last seen at the hotel, and then she was just found. I'm pretty sure I was so irritated. I'm pretty sure that she was missing for like 5 days before her body was found.
Her body was
when they last
found...
saw her in the hotel on the 15th, right?
Yeah, her body.
I swear that I could totally be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read. I think like 3 or 4 days went by or something, and like nobody thought.
Yeah, well, she was last seen on the 9th. That was when Manley dropped her off at the hotel, and then she was found on the 15th. So that's a 3-day gap. I mean,
how does that even?
As unfortunate as it is, I mean, she could have been tortured for at least 2 of those days, and then drained of blood one day.
That's so awful to think about. I wouldn't even. Unnecessary. It's such an unnecessary waste of life, especially in someone like I mean,
we said, it was somebody that was so young and somebody that was prime. Yeah. She was, still establishing herself.
Yeah, like she really didn't even get the chance to live yet. Like she was still figuring everything out. Mm-hmm. And it sucks that she got cut short, especially like, for lack of a better words, literally, like it was just
no pun awful. Intended.
I know, how awful. It's definitely, I would say, do you think this murder, not inspired, but like helped the police in a way to like, do you think they learned from this? I'm looking for any type of silver lining or any type of like positive that can come out of this.
I mean, I really hope that since they say Hodel kind of was the one that called the cops out saying like, if you expose me, I expose you. I really hope that after that was when the LAPD kind of got it together and, cleaned house. And that's when they got clean. I'm not saying that they're perfect now. I don't really keep up with what's going on like in today's police force. But, I really hope that that's when things started to clean up. And so for me, that would be a silver lining.
I hope so, because it's such a tragedy. And like I said, like just the details of the murder and, the crime scene and just the body, it's so dark. I hope that someone somewhere learns something from this, and whether it is the police or, even like Steven, like who knows? Like if he did, like what if he really did identify his dad as the murderer and that was him? Like, all power to him for figuring that out. Yeah. But
he brought light to the evidence that the police didn't want found on his father. So, we give him that.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he exposed the fuck out of them.
Yeah.
Which is good because I know, exactly. Which is good, because that's something definitely needed.
But the reason I wanted to cover this case is actually because today, the day that we're taping this, January 28th, a show on TNT is going to premiere called I Am the Night, which actually does center around the Black Dahlia case. So that'll
be really interesting to watch.
And like I said, also, like when I think California crimes, this is the first one that pops into my head. So I figured, why not, for the first episode, do something here close to home.
Yeah, definitely. And for those people who are interested in true crime, I think that's not weird. I think it's something that's very...
We're normal.
Interesting, very... Yes, exactly. I'm a normal guy. Valerie's a normal girl. We're just hanging out, talking. We're just having a conversation.
About a crime.
And we're telling some interesting stories. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being interested or like, let's just say like having to tell people, or like not having to tell, but like trying to express that like you're into true crime, you're into murder stories or like crime scene photos or like crime investigations. Like it's definitely probably not something you just blurt out, but it's definitely something that a lot of people share in common and something that people are passionate about. I mean, we all turn into detectives. Oh, there's so many cases that we talk about.
There really is. That's why I'm definitely glad that you agreed to do this, just because, I mean...
Thank you for asking.
And like I said, I definitely want you on here again.
I would love that. We can talk about our other favorite.
More true crime. We can talk about conspiracy theories, just anything weird.
I mean, like I said, like I've known Valerie since we were, how old are you in 4th grade? Freaking, I think I was 9 to 10 years old.
9 or 10 years old.
So we've known each other for a long time.
We're going to be 24 this year.
24. So that's why I was just like, it's insane. Like that we've had such a long friendship and we never knew that we had this true crime. I mean, we kind of knew, but we never really talked about it.
We didn't know it was years later. We didn't know it was to this degree of interest.
Yeah, that we were like both actively interested in true crime.
Yeah, we didn't really, like you said, like we knew, like we both kind of shared interest in it, but then I hit you up and I'm like, hey, do you want to be on my true crime podcast?
And I was like, you know what? We're going to do something interesting. We're going to do something new. Why not? Maybe next time we can talk about our little personal story that we have with, I mean, it's really not even that deep.
It's not that deep, but I feel like that's literally what kind of started our careers as investigators, if you could say. Thank you for, like I said again, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Definitely. With some of our more interesting cases. So I think that's it.
Wow, that was fun.
That was. All right, have a good night. Bye.